Okay, let's start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Annabelle Rincon, and with Sedale, we have the pleasure to welcome you to this analytic Tableau user group. So we are three leaders of this user group. So Sedale, who is here today, and Samantha, who is doing the APAC things. And what makes this Tableau user group a little bit unique and different? So first, it's taking place only virtually. Maybe for a conference we will do like it live, but for the moment it's only virtually. It's run every almost every month. Sometimes we make like a little summer break, but we will have one this month and one in July, and after the next one will be in September. And we talk only about Tableau desktop and Tableau prep, and it's like how to demos and explaining how to do analytical things in Tableau. I think that, for instance, Tableau prep, we will talk about that in July. So stay tuned. So it's only about analytics all the time, and make sure that you have subscribed here on this QR code. And during the talk, I will send you in the chat the information to join and already register for the next one. So yes, like I said, we are three leaders, and today it's like Sedale and myself who are running it, and in July also. So who is Sedale? Sedale is a desktop specialist, a Tableau feature author, a community equity task force, and is also the co-leader of his talk. And is like obviously passionate about data and tell story about it. He loves also sports and wine, but I'm sure he will talk about that later. And still, Sedale, we still need to meet and drink together because I have a lot of wine, French wine.
Absolutely.
So yes, my name is Annabelle Rincon. I already introduced myself. I'm leading a Tableau Center of Enablement for Swiss Bank. And myself, I love Tableau and chocolate. Here it's a little QR code for my Data Plus Women Zurich, but no one forces you to join. If you want, you can. And and last but not least, we have Samantha Bachelor, who is joining us when we make like the APAC tag, and she's a data visualization lead for Origin Energy. And she loves to viz, like you see about Nintendo and games in general. So the ground root for today is enjoying the session. You don't have to take any notes because you can see there is a recording. We will send you the recording at the end like of the week. Most probably will take some days, but don't worry, we will receive an email from us. You have two sections in this call. You have the chat session where you can use and say, hey, I'm joining from myself, Tenerife, today, or wherever you are around. That is fun, or to make some comment. And you have the Q&A. Please use the Q&A if you want to ask a question to our speaker today. It will be easier for us to track. Yes, just enjoy the session. And now Sedale will explain to you the wonderful session that we have for you today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Annabelle. Thank you all for joining. Really excited to see people from all over. We've got every coast in the US covered. We've got several people from international countries, including Annabelle in Spain, where I am jealous to be here in Virginia instead of in Spain. We've got three awesome speakers today I'm really excited about. Steve Adams is going to talk about raising your game by drilling down. We've got Fun with Curves with Brian, and then Visionary Velocity, improving your skills, speed, and thinking through public work with Zack Bowders. So a really great panel here, and I'm excited to hear from all of them. First up, we will hear from Steve. Steve Adams is the Brum, I hope I said that right, tug leader and coach and trainer of Visual DJ. He's lived in Excel hell for 24 years, and as an analyst, commercial manager, finance director, and consultant before discovering Tableau 8 years ago, and seems like his life was forever changed. Um, One fun fact, he once smoked a cigar in front of his grammar school headmaster while running around the audience dressed as a lady. I'll either leave that with no context or let Steve tell that story if he chooses to. But for now, we'll let him talk about raising his game by drilling down. Take it away, Steve.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. So yeah, thank you very much for that introduction. I forgot about the running around in the dress. I'm not going to tell you anything about that at all. You can ask me privately. So yeah, I'm Steve Adams. I'm Tableau trainer, coach, and founder at VizDJ, where we strive to give people the confidence to build better dashboards quickly. Now, I've done that handwritten for a couple of reasons, and one of those is one of my penchants is that we want to get things out as quickly as possible to our end consumers so that they can actually tell us where we've got it wrong. Failing early is a real critical part of actually delivering better dashboards more quickly, and I've written that in hand. It's also a bit of a clue that I might make a fair few mistakes in this presentation because I haven't had time to prepare for it as well, so bear with me if I do. What we're talking about with drilling down is making sure that we're actually getting our users as close to action as we possibly can. And there are loads of different ways we can drill down in Tableau. I'm going to go through a number of them with you today. But first of all, I just wanted to cover why it's important to think about the different ways that we do drill down in the first place. And that primarily, each dashboard is aimed at delivering a question on a particular topic. And when we ask that question, we invariably get different types of answers depending on the actual data that we're inquiring at that particular time. And that means that the different answers that we get may lead to actually a secondary question, which requires us to then answer that question before we can get closer and closer to the point where we take action. And again, driven by the data, it may mean that the specific answer to that secondary question is going to lead to another question and potentially another question until we get to a point where we feel that we can actually take action. And that's primarily what we're trying to do, is make sure that our dashboards are taking our user as close to action as possible, bearing in mind that depending on the data, they may need to ask different questions and they will want to then go through this path in different ways and potentially take different actions. And so it's quite important that your dashboard can actually get your user as close to those different actions as possible. So with that in mind, I'm going to start off with the most simple approach to drilling down in Tableau, which is through the data pane hierarchy effectively. So for example, we might start looking at category. We might be interested in profitability of our categories. And here we can see that office supplies is producing the most amount of profit and furniture the least amount of profit. That immediately will ask certain questions. Where are we losing the most money? Where are we getting the most within that product hierarchy? So we can, of course, drag in another dimension to start drilling down within that hierarchy. And I'm just going to sort these from high to low because that's typically what we would be doing in real life. There's a slight problem though, of course, isn't there? Which is that that is an incredibly static view. You might be able to produce that view perfectly out of the box. If it's going to answer all the questions, then you don't need to do more. But if your user says, well, actually, you know what? I don't want to just have that very static view. I might want to decide whether I drill down from category to subcategory myself. Well, we can easily overcome that, of course, by just creating that hierarchy. So I'm just going to drag subcategory on top of category, and we're going to call that product. So that we have a hierarchy in our data pane over here, which is what Tableau has just created for us. And in addition to that, on the shelves, of course, we get the plus and minus sign so that we can drill up and drill down through the pill. But more importantly, our user also gets that plus button on here so that they themselves can drill down into that data. Now, I find in real life, there's very few dimensions like subcategory, which have only got 17 members. And one of the problems is that you end up actually drilling down from first level to second level and having way too many rows in your chart, and you don't have so much flexibility. Now, in an ideal world, you will have in your data multiple dimensions so you can actually build up a longer category hierarchy so that you can drill down to the right moment. But still, if you don't have that in your data, we've got some things we can do about it. So for example, I can select some of these members which are smaller than the other ones, and therefore I'm less significant, I'm not that interested in them, and I can actually just group those together. And you can see now that those 3 items have been brought in. We've got less than 17 rows, which is what we had before. We just got the 15 rows now. And I can actually change the name of that so that it makes sense to my user. Small stuff. And what Tableau has actually done is it's created an additional dimension in our data pane. It's actually automatically replaced the subcategory one that we had in our field. And what we can do is we can drag that into our hierarchy so that our user can then think about actually drilling down from the top to the more summarized view. And then if they want to know what's actually in that small stuff, they can then drill down even further. Okay, so there's your simple, easy to drill through, and we're going to come back and use something similar to that. However, as I mentioned before, we do have a problem with our real data quite often, and that is that we have too many rows. And if I wanted to drill down into the category which is creating the least amount of profit, which in this case is furniture, I might be interested in only drilling down in furniture and just seeing the total levels for technology and office supplies without drilling into those, because that allows me to go into more detail. The concept there is using what we refer to as a single member drill down, and we can do this very, very easily. We're going to build that right now. I'm going to switch data sources so that I don't have that hierarchy already set up for me. So in this case, what we're saying is we want to bring in category, and we want to continue our view of profitability. So I'm going to bring in profit on here as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill into just one of those items, or 2 of those items if I wanted to. And we're going to do that by creating a set which allows us to define which of these ones we want to drill into. So I'm going to create a set first on category. Tableau is going to allow me to then manually select which item belongs in there. Later on, we're going to change this more dynamically, of course. And it's created a category set, which we can now refer to. And a set is like a Boolean relationship. You're either in that set or you're not in that set. And you can do comparisons at a row level in your data. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a calculated field which we're going to call drill down single member. And what we're going to do is a row level comparison in our data, underlying data, and we're going to test to see whether that row, whether the category it belongs to is in our category set. And if it is, then we want to return the product name, because we're not going to drill down into subcategory, which only had those 17 items. We're going to drill down into product, which has got absolutely shed loads of rows, into product name. And if it's not in that set, then we actually want to give the user the indication that they can drill into that row if they wanted to. So we're going to put a plus sign there, which you'll see in a moment, allows the user to see that if it's not drilled into at the moment, then they will be able to drill into it. So we're just going to click on OK with that one. We're going to drag that into our view. Now I'm going to sort these. Once again, we're primarily interested in our loss makers. So I'm going to do this based upon the ascending profitability. So our loss makers are at the top. And we can see, let's bring in the set selector so we can show that set selector on the right hand side. I can deselect furniture. And now we've drilled back up. We can see a high level view. I'm also going to drag in profit onto the label so we can see what's going on there. And I'm going to remove the header so that we clean that up a little bit. So later on, we're going to add some interactivity, but all it's going to do is change the values which are in our set. So if I choose on technology, we're going to drill into technology. But again, you can see that we've got way too many rows to actually show on here. And it may be that we're only really interested in the top 5 or 6 or however many. Okay, and what we want to do is keep the context of all that data. So instead of filtering it out, we want to have an other row in here, which is going to sum up the rest of our values. Now, there is a very standard way to do top N and other, but when we got 2 dimensions, you can't use that technique. So we're going to use a slightly more convoluted technique. And as Annabelle said, this is on record. I'm speaking quite fast. I realize that, but I'm also going to be pointing over to a blog post where you'll be able to actually read a bit more about how I do this. And you'll also be able to download the workbook so you can reverse engineer it as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my profit in a rank calculation. So I'm going to turn that into a table calculation. And by default, Tableau is giving me the lowest rank for the lowest profit, but I actually want to be taking the top of the most loss-making one. So I'm going to reverse that. I can do that in my rank calculation here by just putting in ascending, because the default is a descending. So what that's done is put the 1 for the rank at the very top. Okay, and we need to be a little bit careful here, because if we look at the compute using, we can see that it's doing a table down. But what I actually want to do is a pane driven calculation. So if I click on pane down, we now see that we've got a 1 for our furniture and a 1 for our office supplies. And we now go from 1 all the way down for our rows here. Okay. So that's our rank. Now I'm going to just clean up this view, because what I can do with that is I can drag that over here, and I'm going to call that my pane profit rank. Wrong type of pane, but I think it's okay. Never mind. And what I can do with that is I can bring that into my filter. Now, this is a table calculation, so be aware that when you use a table calculation in a filter, what it's doing is it's filtering the view. All the other data information, the table information, is still able to impact the calculations which we're visualizing. It's just we're effectively dynamically hiding the things which aren't meeting the criteria of this particular filter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say at most 6. Now, the reason why I'm using 6 is because we want to do a top 5, and then on the 6th row, we're going to aggregate everything else in there. So there's actually going to be 6 rows that we're including and maintaining in here. So you can see now I've got a slight problem because the compute using is wrong. It's still on table down, so I need to change that to pane down, and it's asking me to select the value again. One of those little niggles that I love all the time. And so we can see here at the moment that we're filtering it down to the maximum of the 6 for the one that we've drilled into. And now what we want to do is we want to see that on the row 6, that instead of actually looking at just the value for the 6th one, which is Apple Signal Booster, we're actually summing up everything which is on after that ranking of 6 as well. Because remember, this filter is a table calculation filter, so it's not actually removing that information from our table. First thing I'm going to do, though, is change this label here, because I don't want that to say Apple. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a calculated field. And this calculated field is going to be called drill down single member top 5 and other. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use another table calculation called size, which tells us how many rows there are within a table or within a pane. Okay, so I'm just going to test if the size of my pane is greater than 1, i.e. it's the one that we've drilled into. Then we want to test again to see if the pane profit rank, the misspelt pane profit rank, there it is, the misspelt pane profit rank. If that's less than or equal to 5, then what I'm going to return is the value of the drill down single member. And later on, we're going to then just group everything else in there. But I'm going to actually just add a little bit of context for my user. So I'm going to first of all, bring in the rank itself so my user can see what the misspelt pain profit rank is. And we're going to concatenate that with a dash to make it look a little bit cleaner, and concatenate that with the value. But we also need to convert this to a string because the calculation itself is a integer. Likewise, we can't combine aggregate and non-aggregate. You've definitely heard that and seen that error message before. Somebody click in here, it's expecting an enter, it's not showing me what that is, but we need to actually aggregate this value here so that we can compare it with that table calculation, which is an aggregated value. So I'm just going to put a min around here because that's going to give me the correct response anyway. What we're going to do then is use our else statement. So if we're not ranked 0 to 5, we're going to just dump everything into something, and we're going to call it all others in this example. And we're going to close off our first inner if statement. And then we want to close off the other if statement, the outer one. So basically for any category which has not been selected for drill down, we're going to return that plus sign so that we can end this out. Okay, so that's all working nicely. Hallelujah. We've got pretty poor naming conventions going on here. I don't think that's an issue. We're going to drag that into the middle of our, between our category and our single member drill down, and we'll see what we've got at the moment is we've got the one measure number coming through. I don't want that one number coming through, and that again is because we've defaulted to the table down. So I'm just keeping the plus sign in here so that we can expand that later on. And now I'm going to hide this view here because we don't need to see that header, and it's getting a little bit more clean. The only slight problem we have right now, of course, is that the all others is not the all others. So we need to fix that now. And we're going to do that with another calculated field, which you'll probably be very glad to hear is probably my last calculated field for the whole of this demonstration. And we're going to call this one profit bottom 5 products and other. So what we're going to do is test whether or not we are not in the top 5 by just comparing the rank once again to 5 in this case. And then what we want to do, bearing in mind what I said earlier on, which was that this table calculation filter over here isn't actually filtering the data. What we're going to do with this calculation is we're going to take everything from row 6 onwards all the way to the very end of this pane and add it all up. And we're going to do that very simply with a window sum table calculation. So we're going to do a window sum. We're going to add up our profit, of course. And with our window sum, if I click on window sum here, you can see in the help member, you can see that we've got the option to tell where we start our window sum from and where we finish it. So in this particular cell, which is greater than 5, we want to actually be showing from this point onwards and adding up all the profit to the very end of that particular pane. And we can refer to the very end of that pane by using the table calc called last, the helper calculation of last. So just to repeat, what we're doing is by just adding up everything that isn't in our top 5 within that pane and dumping it into one line. Now we're just going to say, well, for the 5 that we do want to show independently, then the value we need to return, of course, is actually the sum of profit. If I could type. Now what we want to do is apply this value, and I'm going to just drag this over here so we can see what we're actually doing. On the left-hand side, we're only showing the profit for the 6th item, but on the right-hand side, we're adding up all the profit for the remaining part of that. So we've taken those 1,500 rows or whatever we had, we've actually now summarized this into something much more neat that we can use. And I'm going to bring that off, and I'm going to bring this onto our take this off. We no longer need this value here, and I'm going to label this And I'm going to remove that header. So that's our drill down in the hierarchy. We've created a hierarchy, in this case, from category all the way down to product, because that's what we're interested in doing. But our users have come to us previously and they said, well, actually, the first question I really want to ask of my data is geographically, where are we losing the most money? So we're going to just throw together a couple of quick visualizations to show how other ways we can drill through our data. So if our first question is geography, obviously a map would make some sort of sense. I'm going to bring in country level. So we've got country organization within our company. And I'm going to drag profit into color so that we end up automatically with a filled map. And we can see immediately that you don't want to be living in the Netherlands or Sweden. It is a little bit dodgy when we're looking at fill maps, of course, because the brightest orange is the Netherlands, and they're the ones losing the most amount of money. But cognitively, we get more attracted to Sweden because it's just such a much bigger place. So just be wary that fill maps are a little bit of an issue. But when you've got this level of granularity, where we've only got 15 marks, it's not such an issue. Sorry for if you're watching from the United States, we've only got 15 states in Europe. So the next step would be to drill down into our bar chart, our categories, our subcategories. And once we've decided, we've identified which of those categories we want to drill down further, the next question our users want to know is, which customers are causing us the biggest pain based upon that drill through? Okay, so we're going to use a scatter chart for that because it's great for identifying outliers very quickly. So we're going to just look at profit against sales, and we're going to bring in customer, and I'm going to be consistent with my coloration using a circle there, and I'm going to bring in profit onto my color so we can see where our customers are. So if I hover over these, I'm not going to bother with tooltips that much today, but obviously you'd want to clean those up, but you can see the outliers very quickly. We can hover over those. So Vera Shifley is giving us a loss of 3,957, even though the total sale was only 5,600. She's a pain. Let's do something about her. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I've prepared a template for my dashboard so I can just bring in my analysis much more quickly. It's laid out nicely, and I can actually just populate it with my charts quite quickly. Should have opened this up earlier on, do apologize. I've actually used, as you can see down here, I'm using an extension from Info Topics, which it's really easy to actually make things look quite nice, which is good because I like that. Now, what I've done is I've got these templates set up and I've created these simple placeholders because I can just hover over to my sheets and I can just swap in the bar chart that I want to actually use. In this case, I'm going to use this bar chart, which is the one we were. No, I don't want to use the bar chart there, of course. I do apologize. It's the map that's going up there. So let's go to swap the map in. And I'm going to remove the title. And I don't need to do much more else. For the bar charts, we're going to swap in the single member drill down that we just created. One of the benefits of doing this top 5 and other approach is when we do the fit and the entire view, we can always fit the entire view now in this space. Whereas if we were to drill down and we ended up with hundreds of rows, of course, that would just look really, really ugly if you did a fit entire view. And then you end up scrolling through that worksheet and it's not very good usability. So that's one absolute benefit of using this approach as well. Just removing the title. And for my scatter chart, I'm going to bring that in as well. So before we add the interactivity in terms of drilling down visually through these 3 worksheets, I just want to add the interactivity for us to add into the bar chart so that our user can do that single member click down drill. And in order to do that, we need to change the set that we're drilling through. So that requires us to add a set action on the dashboard. So we go to actions. I don't know what these are doing here, so I'm just going to remove them. And we're going to add a change set values action. We're going to just call it the category set. And we want to run this only from the bar chart. And we're going to run it on select. The set we're going to change the value of is in our VizDJ EU Superstore 2 data set. And I'm going to assign values to that set. And when I deselect it, I want to remove all values so that when our user deselects it, they actually drill back out again. Okay. So let's just try that out. If I click into furniture, nothing happens because I did it wrong. Otherwise known as emergency debug mode. Let's find out what's going on here. Category set, that should be okay. No, don't know what's going wrong. Don't worry about it because you'll be able to get everything else sorted from the other ones. Let's just assume that's working for now. In fact, it's
Yes,
working now.
Steve. Sorry to interrupt. You select the map and not the bar chart on the action.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad.
The audience is very active too. Huh? It's not.
Thank you very much. Oh my God, it's such a simple mistake. I couldn't even do the debug mode myself. So thank you very much, everybody, for noticing how useless I was there. Let's just show that is working now. Fantastic. Thank you. So we want to drill into our least profitable furniture. We can see that we've got 5 products which are generating the least amount of profit, but we also see just how much profit we're generating for the remainder of that particular item. Now, I said the next drill down we want to do is then to say, well, actually, we want to look from the map and identify who's our least profit making. So we would want to use this map as a filter. That's very easy, of course, to do. We're going to use that as a filter, which will now filter everything. So, for example, we might filter on the Netherlands or Sweden and filter the rest. What we also want to do is drill down from the bar chart so that once we've identified which country we're losing the most money in and which products we're losing the most money in, we then want to find out which customers are buying those and causing us the most pain. So we're going to add another filter action. Which is going to take us from our bar chart and filter the scatter chart. And we're going to run this on select as well. There is only one dimension in our scatter chart, so we don't need to worry about which items we're filtering. So now I can look at the Netherlands and I can see that we're losing a lot of money in technology and also in furniture. Let's click into furniture and we can see that there are some items in here. Office Star Executive Leather is causing us a problem as well. And now we can see in our scatter chart that Valerie Mitchum has made 2,571 sales and it's costing us nearly twice as much and therefore we're losing a huge amount of margin. So what we might want to do now is understand what are the products Valerie Mitchum is actually ordering from us. So we want to drill down again from this point. And one of the ways to do that would be to add in a Visin tooltip. So we're going to add in a bottom 5 products Viz in tooltip, which will allow us to see what other products Valerie's ordering from us as well. So let's just bring in our product name. Let's bring in profit. And we're going to sort that on the field, ascending once more, because it's the bottom ones we're looking for in this particular dashboard. And I'm just going to color code that to be consistent. Now, we only really want to look at the top 5, just in case she's got 100. So we're going to do a top 5 filter on here. In fact, it's the bottom 5, of course, because it's the lowest profit ones we're choosing. So we change the top to a bottom, and we're going to do that with 5. And we've already selected profit. So there is the chart that we want to include in our tooltip. I'm just going to do a little bit of formatting because it wouldn't make sense not to have those values for each row. And we're going to, deselect the header. So then we go back to our scatter chart and we go to our tooltip and we can insert our sheet, which we've called bottom 5 products. Now, when I hover over my customer, we're seeing the view is too large. So maybe I need to change the max width to, I don't know, 500. That'll probably do. There you go. We can only see one product there. And the reason for that is because when we hover over this item, we're actually passing a filter to the underlying Visin tooltip, which is the bottom 5 filters. And we can see in italics, the tooltip filter has come through. Now, obviously, what we want to do is filter our data set just to that one customer and then look at their top 5. And we do that by adding context to the filter. So when we add that context to the filter and go back to our scatter chart, we get to see all top 5 products. Let's go back to our dashboard and see that working and playing out on our dashboard. Now, here you can see that we've actually got all top 5 products, even though I've filtered the scatter chart on Office Star. Now, that's because Tableau hasn't by default filtered the data in the Visin tooltip based upon the selection I made on the bar. And that, in this case, is what I want. I want to actually show the other products as well. So I want to see if there's any other problems that we have with that particular customer. If you do, however, want to filter your Visin tooltip based upon the selection or something else in the dashboard, there are some nice blogs about it. And I suggest you have a good search around. Now, we've got that. But what if I wanted to actually then look at the individual orders that Valerie's made? So I can actually see if there's any problems there. Well, we can do that. I'm going to first of all create a very simple orders table. It's going to be a highlight chart. So let's bring in our order ID. Let's bring in our order date as well. And there are different products on each of those orders. So let's look at those different products. Maybe we want to bring in the product ID as well. And I'm going to make a highlight chart because we're going to look at multiple measures here. So I'm going to bring in my sales measure. I'm also going to bring in my profit measure to the table. And why not bring in quantity? And I think one of the problems is going to be discount, because we're probably offering too much discount to the individuals that are losing the most money. So I want to turn this into a highlight table. We can do that by doing a copy drag of our measure values onto color. But we get a very wishy-washy look and feel because we're actually coloring everything with the same palette on the same extent. But we can change that by right-clicking on our measure values and using separate legends. So now we actually end up with separate legends in our table. And for this demonstration, I'm just going to focus on the 2 important ones, which are profit, where I'm going to use the full color range. We can see here that negative profit is good, it's orange, it's a warning color, so we're going to see that nicely. But I'm also going to make sure that the center always switches over at 0, where we switch from loss to profit. And the other one I want to look at is average discount. Now, discount is only ever a positive number, but I'm going to put it on a diverging color palette of red and black, because in my organization, I'm going to reverse that color so the high ones are red. I'm also going to use the full color range again. In my organization, we're allowed to create discounts up to a value of 20% without getting senior level sign off. So our switch over is if we've got a discount above 20%, that's then a warning sign for us. And we're actually going to start looking at those. So there's our underlying table. We're going to go to another dashboard where we're going to bring that table in by swapping in and removing our placeholder. We're going to do a quick fit width, hoping that we won't need too many rows, but at the moment we do because we haven't done any filtering. And now we're going to go back to our original dashboard and we're going to drill down from this high-level summary down to the detail of the orders just by simply adding in another dashboard action, which is going to be a filter action. It's going to come from our scatter chart and it's going to target the other dashboard, which is the 4 to 5 dashboard. And we're going to run that on menu because we don't want to be disconcerting for our user to click on something and then bounce somewhere else. So they're going to have the choice of actually then making 2 clicks to navigate. And we're going to look at the order details 4, and we can insert a dynamic customer name so that we actually get to see that when we click on here. So now we're going to hover over Valerie again. We still see the Visin tooltip, but when I select on that now, we also get the opportunity to navigate directly over to our second dashboard. We've filtered that down to just Valerie, but let's make that clear. Let's go into here, remove the sheet name. We don't need that, but we do want our customer name in here. And then we want to apply that. Now I'm going to hope we've got a couple more minutes left. I'm looking over at Annabelle. I've got a couple more minutes left. Yeah. Because right now we haven't actually taken any action, and we want to take action. What we can see is that Valerie's actually got the largest loss making is on this particular product, is on one particular order. There's a number of orders where she's got 50% discount. That's crazy. That's breaking our internal rules. Let's get over to the underlying system which gave us this data so that we can have a look in that system. Now, it may be a CRM system, it may be a finance system. If this were patient data, it could be a PAS, it could be a patient administration system. But ultimately what we're going to do is take our user on that journey all the way through to the source system, because it may be there that they can make a difference. They can actually maybe correct some errors, for example, that have happened in the transactions, or it may be that we need to contact, in this case, the account manager, give them a nice slap and say, you're giving away too much discount, or maybe we need to get in contact with the customer. So how can we do that? Well, we want to actually navigate to a third-party web app. I don't have one that we can link through to with the EU Superstore data set. So I'm just going to pretend that Google's my third-party app. And we're going to go into Google and we're going to search for I'm just going to type in product, because what we'll see in the URL is that we have parameterized that URL with that search term. And that's exactly what will be happening with your web apps. So as long as you've got the right data to refer to your web apps, such as an ID, product ID, customer ID, order ID, etc., patient ID, then you should be able to navigate directly to the record that you're interested in. So we're going to copy this and go back into Tableau. And we are going to add another action. This time it's a go to URL action. And what we're going to do is we're going to, in my case, I'm going to Google search on, and I'm going to insert the specific product name so that my user knows what's going on. Again, they're running the action on menu, and I'm going to paste the URL into here, but I'm going to replace product dynamically with the value that we click on from our data set. So in this case, now I'm going to click on the one that's causing us the problems. That would take me through to my CRM or some other application. In this case, it's taking me over to Google, and we can actually do some things in our underlying transactional system. So that's kind of like a real quick fly all the way through on simple techniques that we can do for drill down. There are many, many other techniques, but hopefully you can see I did that in about 45 minutes. So they're relatively simple to put in place. But the key is thinking about what it is you're trying to achieve. And what you're trying to achieve is getting as close as possible to an action that your user can take to improve the performance of your organization. And on that, I say thank you.
Awesome. Great job, Steve. You can see, if you see the chat, there is a raucous applause for all of your awesome tips. And throughout, lots of people have been saying how useful they found this. I think we've got time for a couple of questions. If you do have time to look at the Q&A, there have been a fair amount of more technical, tactical questions. So we'd love for you to go through and take a look at some of those. But one that I think might be useful for everyone, one person asked, are these practices Steve is sharing explicitly part of a Tableau certification? And I might even broaden that to say, generally, where are some of the best ways to practice some of the things that you brought up, learn about some of the techniques that you use, so that people can start to improve on their drill downs?
I think some of the best things you can do is just really just participate in the regular events going on. So, for example, we have the Workout Wednesday event, which obviously goes on every week at the moment. You're going to be asked to do something very specific, and you're going to need to work out how to do it. And that's going to force you into asking questions of Google to get the right answers. And that's when you really start to learn the deep techniques. I mean, obviously, we provide our customers the ability to come to us and ask us for any specific challenges, and we provide them inspiration. But if you want to actually learn, there's some great resources online, and actually participating. What I always find is that you need to have an issue that needs to be resolved Don't just try and learn for the sake of learning.
That's a great point. I think can be difficult, especially early on, because a lot of people do kind of just need to learn how to do this stuff. But I agree. I think having a problem that you have to solve. Workout Wednesday is a great call out, and I think a lot of people are already posting. Thanks for those who posted the link to Workout Wednesday, because it's really, really useful, especially early on, to have problems that you can kind of work out. I'm trying to look and see if there are any other. Another kind of creativity question I thought was really interesting. The issue this person's having is that as you start to drill down, obviously you get more and more granular with your data, and so colors can become a little meaningless. The difference between profit and loss becomes really small when you have really small amounts of data. Are there any creative ways you found to handle making more meaning out of some of these things?
Well, the first thing is if you're going to have different colorations, you need to make sure that you're on the same scale. So if you're drilling in, make sure you're actually drilling in equally across everywhere so that you can change the coloration equally. And you might have noticed in what I was doing there is I was using the option on the color legend to use the full color. And that was then making it a little bit more obvious between the small differences that we have. So color is still one way to do that. But of course, if there are any specific things that you're looking for and you're drilling into smaller things, then maybe you actually just want to bring in additional conditional labeling, for example, where you're actually flagging particular items and saying, hey, this one's more than X% or whatever it is that's actually your cutoff point.
Cool. Thank you again. Lots of other questions in here if you have time to look through the Q&A, but want to make sure that I give Brian and Zack their due as well. So we're going to transition over to Brian. Thanks again, Steve. Brian is lots of things, but in terms of our summary of Tableau visionary, public ambassador, and also currently a senior data visualization and analytics consultant at Clear Intelligence. He calls himself a Tableau fanatic, which if you follow him on Twitter, you can see that is very true. He leads the Boston Tug and co-authors Do More with Data with his wife, Jackie, who is also a lovely member of Tableau community. Brian loves to help others leverage the power of Tableau to get the most of that out of their data, both as a consultant and then through his work with the community. And I know this is something I'm interested in because I find curves to be a particular challenge for lots of different reasons. So looking forward to hearing Brian talk about fun with curves in Tableau.
Yeah, thank you, Sedale. Let me just share my screen. Oh, sorry, give me 1 second. All right, so yeah, thank you, Sedale, and thank you everyone for having me. My name is Brian Moore, and today we're going to be talking about creating curved elements in Tableau. So hoping to make this presentation somewhat interactive, so if you want to follow along, just go to domorewithdata.com. There's a resources tab up in the top right. Click on that, and then the top link here called Fun with Curves in Tableau -presentation workbook and data. You can download the sample workbook. There's also the sample data there, but the workbook should have everything you need. It already has all the data sources built and a lot of the calculations. So I had a slide for some background on myself, but I think Sedale already hit all of these, so we can just skip ahead. All right, so curved things in Tableau. So first, think about some of your favorite pieces of data art. I'm willing to bet that the majority of them, or at least a good portion of them, contain some type of curved element. And there are a couple of reasons why that's normally true. So first, there have been several scientific studies that have proved that when it comes to art, humans prefer circles and curves over straight lines and corners. And there's also that wow factor. So as you probably know, curves don't really exist in Tableau. They take effort, and a lot of people just don't really know where to start building them. So we can start here. So we're going to walk through the technical process of building these curves, all the way from densifying your data up to building your views. And we're going to focus on 3 types of curved elements: circles, Bezier curves, and sigmoid curves. And you can also find all of this information in a series of blog posts on domorewithdata.com called Fun with Curves in Tableau. So to build any kind of curved element in Tableau, you need to densify your data. You may have heard that term before, but if you're not really sure what it means, it's basically just creating additional data points. So imagine you have a data source with 3 rows like we have here on the left, but you need some additional data to draw your curved lines or make some polygons. We can do what's called a Cartesian join or a cross join to a densification table, which in this case has just one column called points, and it has 5 records numbered 1 through 5. So the result of this Cartesian join is our data source now has 15 records. So we have 5 records for each of the 3 rows in our source data. So for row 1, we now have 5 rows with points 1 through 5, same with row 2, and same with row 3. And to do that kind of Cartesian join, just in your data source, it has to be done in the physical layer. So you're going to double click on here to get down to the physical layer. You're going to bring in your source data, your densification table, and then we're just going to use a join calculation to join those together. I usually use a 1 on both sides, but this could be anything as long as it's the same on both sides. So it could be a 0, could be a 1, could be your name, could be your favorite football team. Doesn't matter as long as it's the same on both sides. But there are a few things to keep in mind when you're building your densification table and choosing how many rows you want to include. So if you have too many rows, you're going to be really hurting the performance of the dashboard because basically you're blowing out your data source. You're creating that many rows for every row in your data. So if you have 10 rows and join to 100 rows, you know, it can build up really fast. So you want to make sure you kind of balance performance and the kind of functionality. Because if you have too few rows, then your curves don't really look smooth. They look a little bit jagged. So let's do a quick demonstration of how the number of rows in your densification table can affect the shape of a circle. So you can't draw a circle with 1 point or 2 points, but here's a circle with 3 points, which is actually a triangle. 4, 5, 6, and you can see as the number of points in the densification table increases, the circle starts to take shape a little bit more, and then all the way up to 50. So when you're drawing a curve in Tableau, you're not actually drawing a curve, you're drawing a series of straight lines. And the more rows you have in your densification table, the shorter those lines need to be, and the smoother the curve will appear. So when drawing circles in Tableau, I tend to use anywhere between 25 and 100 points, depending on how large the circle will be. So if it's taking up the whole screen, I'll go 100. If it's just a small circle in the corner, then 25 should be more than sufficient. All right, and that is a good segue into our first type of curve. So you may be wondering why you would ever need to draw a circle when Tableau already has a circle mark type, and that's a good question. But the calculations needed for drawing a circle are the exact same calculations needed to build any type of radial chart you can imagine. So this is more about learning the technique so you can apply it to your own custom charts and less about actually drawing circles. But I do use this technique pretty frequently on Tableau Public to draw circles when the exact size of the circle is important. So it's really easy to control the size with this method. With the circle mark type in Tableau, there's so many different options to adjust the size. The actual size can kind of lose its meaning pretty easily. So I do use this occasionally to actually draw circles. So if you downloaded the sample workbook, I've already built all of the data sources, but here's a look at the kind of the underlying data. So the source data has 10 records that we're going to use to draw 10 circles. And we're going to use a densification table that has 50 points. So just one column with values 1 through 50. And once you have your data source built, there are only 2 things you need to know to be able to draw a circle. So you need to know the distance of each point from the center of the circle. So that's this little blue line here, also called the radius. And you need to know the position of each point around the circle. So for our circles, we want the area of the circle to represent the value in our data source. So we can calculate the radius or the distance from the center of the circle, that first input, using this calculation here, which is just the square root of our value divided by pi. For the second input, the position around the circle. So imagine you're looking at a clock. So 3 o'clock would be 25% of the way around the circle, 6 o'clock would be 50%, 9 o'clock would be 75%, and 12 o'clock would be 100% all the way around the circle. So this position field is going to be a percentage from 0 to 100 that represents how far around the circle that point will appear. And to calculate this, we're just going to divide the points field, which has values 1 through 50, by the maximum value in that field, which is 50. And you can see the result over here. So I'll end up with a point at every increment of 2% going around the circle. So 0.1 at 2%, 0.2 at 4%, all the way around until we get to 0.50 at 100%. Once you have those two inputs, you can just plug them into these equations down here at the bottom for X and Y. And then if you've downloaded the workbook and you want to try this out, just click on the Circle Demo tab and then select the Circle Data source. And we're going to right click on X and drag that out to columns. The reason I right click and drag is because it lets you choose the level of aggregation right when you bring it out. And we want to bring it out with no aggregation because we want each individual value. So I'm going to choose that top option there. And then I'm going to do the same thing with Y on rows. And I'm going to filter to just one of our circles. So now if I bring that position field out on the label, let's change that to a percentage. So now you can see those percentages. We have 2 for the first mark, 4, 6, 8, wrapping all the way around the circle until we get to 100%. And if I bring out our radius field, we can see that's the same for every circle because it's just calculating the distance from the center to the point. All right, so now to draw our circles, we're going to change the mark type to a polygon. We're going to bring out the circle ID field. So you can bring this on to detail or you can bring it on to color. It just needs to be on the mark shelf to tell Tableau that these are individual circles. So, so I'm going to bring it on to color. And then we need to tell Tableau how to connect those dots. So we want to connect them, think connect the dots. We want to start with 1, 2, 3. We want to connect 1 through 50. So those are the values in our points field. I'm going to right click and bring that onto path without any aggregation. And there we go. So you're probably thinking 2 things looking at this. 1, these look like ovals, not circles. And 2, I only see 2 of them. So the reason they look like ovals is because in this this worksheet view, the pane is much wider than it is tall. So when you place a radial chart on a dashboard, it's important that you set the width and the height equal to each other. And you'll also want to fix the X and Y axis so they're the same, so you can ensure that it's an actual circle and it's not being distorted either horizontally or vertically. And the reason you only see 2 circles is because they all have the same starting point. All of our circles are starting at 0, 0. Now we're kind of building the circle around that. So all of our circles are currently stacked on top of each other. But if I click through this legend, you can see that we do actually have 10 circles. They're just not all visible at the same time. So I could bring circle ID out on the columns, put them all in a row. Could bring circle ID onto rows and put them all in a column. What I like to do is I like to have everything in the same pane. So when we brought a dimension on the columns and broke it up into 10 individual panes, I like to have them on the same pane and just have complete control of where those get placed. So we're going to use an offset value to arrange our circles. And that's going to be based off of this circle spacing parameter up here. So we're going to create a calculated field called circle offset. And it's just going to be that parameter times our circle ID. So our circle ID had values 1 through 10. So for the first one, the value is going to be 10, for the second, 20, third, 30, and so on. All right, so now if we just add this to our X value, so I'm going to edit my X calculation, and I'm just going to add that calculated field. Now we have 10 circles in a row within the same pane. Similarly, I could add it to my Y calculation. And now we have 10 circles in one pane in a column. And the way this works is it's basically moving every single one of the points that we calculated an equal amount for each circle. So for the first circle, it's moving every point 10 to the right. For the second circle, it's moving everything 20. For the third circle, it's moving everything 30. So technically, it's moving every single point by that offset amount. But I like to think about it a little bit differently. The way that I think about it is basically creating a new starting point for each circle. So circle 1 will start at 10. Circle 2 will start at 20 and so on. So we're basically creating a new starting point and then building our circle around that. So it's essentially the same exact thing, but it does make it a little bit easier to think about it this way when you get into some more complicated examples. Yeah, so if we offset our X values, we get a row of circles. If we offset our Y values, we get a column of circles. If we offset both, we get a diagonal line of circles. So these are a couple easy ways to plot your circles in a line, but we're talking about circles. So let's plot our circles in a circle. So to plot these around a circle, we need to figure out what values to add to our X and Y coordinates. So we need to calculate our new starting point for each one of these circles. So we have 10 circles and we want to plot those in a circle. So we can use the same exact calculations we used before to find those new starting points. So once again, we just need 2 inputs. We need the distance from the center of the circle, and we need the position around the circle. So in this case, the radius can be constant. It's not representing any value. We want it to be the same for every point. We can make the circle however big or small we want. So for that, we're just going to use a parameter that we can adjust to make it kind of dynamic. So I have a parameter called base radius. And for the position around the circle, so previously to draw each one of our circles, we plotted 50 points around a circle. Now we just need to plot 10 points, 1 for each circle. So the calculation would be the circle ID, which has values 1 through 10, divided by the maximum value of the circle ID field, which is 10. So we have 10 circles. So circle 1 will be at 10%, circle 2 at 20%, 30%, and all the way around 200%. And if we plug those 2 values into our calculations for X and Y, here we're calling them base X and base Y, we can calculate those new starting points. So if we go back to our example here, I'm going to edit my X calculation again. And we'll just add that new starting point, which is base X. And on Y, I'm going to add base Y. And there we go. Now we have 10 circles plotted in a circle, and you can use this radius field to kind of make them closer together or farther apart. So the main takeaway from this section is to build any kind of radial chart, really anything you can imagine, you just need 2 inputs. The difficulty for calculating those inputs will be different depending on what you're trying to do, but the inputs will always be the same. And it's just the distance of each point from the center of a circle and the position of each point around the circle. All right, so now on to our second type of curved elements. These are Bezier curves. And remember, if you don't catch everything today on this quick run through, you can learn more about all of these techniques on domorewithdata.com. So there are a lot of different types of Bezier curves, and they can really vary in complexity. But today we're going to focus on quadratic Bezier curves, which have 3 control points. So an easy way to think about these control points is that there is a starting point, there's an end point, and there's a midpoint. And the 3 points together will create a triangle. So the starting point and the end point are simply the start and the end of your curved line. And that third point, the midpoint, is going to determine the shape of the curved line. So here are a few examples. All 4 of these lines have the same exact start and end point, but the varying midpoints create very different curves. So in most applications in Tableau, we're going to be dealing with curves like we see in example 1 and example 4, where the midpoint is exactly halfway between the start and end point, creating an isosceles triangle. And for this presentation, we're going to focus only on example 1, which is an equilateral triangle, meaning all 3 sides are the same length. So again, if you've downloaded the workbook, I've already built all of the data sources for you, but here's a look at the data we'll be using. So we have 10 rows of data that we're going to use to draw 10 curved lines. We have starting and end points for X, and we're going to use 0 for all of our Y coordinates. So all of these lines will start and end at 0 on the Y-axis. And for our densification, we're going to use the same exact table that we used in the circles example. All right, so now for the inputs. So as I mentioned before, we're building Bezier curves with 3 control points. Our data source has coordinates for 2 of the 3 points that we need. We have coordinates for the start and the end of each of the lines. So if we go back to our data, line 1 is going to start at 1, 0 and end at 10, 0. Line 2 is going to start at 3, 0 and end at 15, 0. Line 3 start at 4, 0, end at 7, 0, and so on. So we just need to calculate the 3rd set of points for each of our lines. So because we decided to use equilateral triangles, we can calculate these values pretty easily. So for X, this value is going to be exactly in the middle of the starting point and the end point. So in the example up here, the triangle is starting at 0, 0, ending at 10, 0. So our midpoint for X is just going to be 5. So you can calculate this for all of your values. If you just take your X start value plus your X end value divided by 2 will give you the X value for the midpoint for all of your records. For Y, we need to calculate the height of the triangle. So we know that all sides are going to be equal because it's an equilateral triangle. So we can calculate the length of any side by subtracting the starting X value from the ending X value. So in this example, that would be 10 minus 0. So all sides of this triangle have a length of 10. And then we plug that into the formula for calculating the height of an equilateral triangle, which is the length of any side times the square root of 3 divided by 2. And we get the Y value for our midpoint of 8.67. So if you build both of those calculations into Tableau, then we now have our 3 sets of coordinates for all 10 of our lines. And if we were to stop here and just plot those 3 points, we would end up with 10 equilateral triangles with different starting points on the x-axis. So if we click through these, we can see our 10 triangles. Ooh. All right, so to turn these triangles into curved lines, we only need a few more calculations. The first of these is going to be T. And think of T as similar to the position field that we used in the circles example. It's going to be a percentage between 0 and 100%. That's used to evenly space points along our line. The only difference here is that for this example, the values have to start at 0 and end at 100%. So in the circles, they started at 2% and ended at 100. But because we were using polygons, Tableau automatically connected those last 2 points. So we need to modify the calculation a little bit so they're evenly spaced between 0 and 100%. And to do that, we just subtract 1 from the numerator and denominator. So it's our points field minus 1 divided by the max points field minus 1. Now, if we just plug all of those fields into our calculations for X and Y, you may notice that these calculations are exactly the same for X and Y, just the X calculation is using our 3 X values and the Y calculation is using the 3 Y values. And now let's, all right. So if you're following along at home, just click on the Bezier demo tab and then the Bezier data source. Similar to the other example, we're just going to right click on X and bring that out onto columns. Right click on Y, bring that out onto rows. Again, we're going to bring our line ID field out in the color. And then we will just change this to a line. And then we have 10 curved lines. One thing I want to point out here is anytime you're dealing with lines or polygons in Tableau, you should always address the path field So sometimes Tableau is pretty good at guessing how it should join those points, but it's always good practice to tell it specifically to do it, because as you add more things to this view, things are going to start breaking. So I'm going to take my points field and bring that on the path. And even though it doesn't change the view at all, it's important to have it there. All right, so this was a relatively simple example, but let's take what we learned here and combine it with what we learned in the first section. So first, we're going to plot our X values in a circle instead of a straight line. So we know that from the first section that in order to plot points around a circle, we need two inputs, the radius and the position around the circle. So for the radius, we want all of our points to be equally distanced from the center, so we can use that base radius parameter that we used in the first example. But the position around the circle is a little bit trickier this time. So we need to know the maximum X value, but we have two X columns. We have the X start and the X end. So if we assume that all of the lines are moving from the left to the right, we could just take the maximum value of that X end, because it's always going to be higher than the X start. But let's not assume anything, and we're just going to use an LOD expression to get the maximum value of both of those columns. So that's this max point calculation here. And essentially what this calculation is doing is this part, for each row, it's calculating the maximum value of the X start and X end columns. And then the LOD is getting the max value from those for all of the records in our data source. So if we went back and looked at our data, the maximum value of both of these columns would be 15. All right, so now we need to plot both the starting points and the ending points around the circle. So we need to calculate the position for both. So to get the position for the starting points, it's just going to be very similar to what we did before, X start divided by the max point. To get the positions for the endpoints, it's just going to be the same calculation, but using X end divided by the max point. And then we're going to plug those into our same X and Y calculations that we did earlier. So we have calculations for the start using the position start field, and calculations for the end using the position ends field. All right, so let's take a quick step back. So we need three sets of coordinates to draw our curved lines. We need the coordinates for the start of the line, the coordinates at the end of the line, which we just calculated, and we need the coordinates for that midpoint. But lucky for us, a circle has a very convenient midpoint that we can use for all of these lines, and that's 0, 0, just the center of the circle. So now we can plug in our circle, our start points, our end points, and our midpoints, which is 0. We're going to plug those into the same calculation that we used in the last Bezier example to create this circle X and circle Y field. Now I'm going to drag those out over my X and Y fields. Oh, wrong one. And now we have the foundation of a chord chart. So let's, so that chord chart uses the same exact calculations as the first example with the Bezier curves. We just used a little bit of additional math to calculate the coordinates for the start and end points. So for example, line 2 in the first example went from 3 to 15 on the x-axis. So we used the points that were in our data source, which were 3, 0 and 15, 0 respectively, and then we calculated the midpoint. In the second example, we also drew a curved line between 3 and 15, but instead of those points being on a flat plane, we just wrapped those points around a circle. So you can calculate the coordinates for those 3 sets of points in a lot of different ways. You know, it really just depends on your use case. But really, once you have those 3 sets of points, it's just a matter of plugging those into the calculations for X and Y to build your curves. All right, now on to our third and final type of curved element, and these are sigmoid curves. So whether you know it or not, these type of curves are everywhere on Tableau Public. So sankey diagrams, Kirby bump charts, dendrograms, curved lines on a map, these all use the same type of curve, and they're all created in very similar ways. So we're going to cover a few examples here, but the same technique can be applied to create just an endless number of custom chart types. So there are two different models that can be used to draw sigmoid curves. We're going to call them the standard model and the dynamic model. Today, we're going to focus on just the standard model. So think about most types of charts that use sigmoid curves, and they have something in common. The start and the end of the lines are uniform. So if your chart is going from left to right, they all start in the same column, they all end in the same column. If it's going top down, they all start in the same row and they end in the same row. So when both of those are true, when both sides are uniform, which they usually are, you can use the standard model. But if either of those aren't true, then you have to use this dynamic model, which I'm not going to cover that today, but I do cover it in the part 3 of this blog series. Okay, so here's a look at the data we're going to be using for the first example. We have 12 rows that we're going to use to draw 12 curved lines. And each of our lines has a starting position and an ending position. So I know we've used the term position a lot in previous examples, but here just think of it as kind of a ranking. So position of 1 is going to be at the bottom, 2 above that, 3 above that, and then all the way up until you reach the max position, which in this case is 12. You may notice that the densification table here looks a little bit different too. So instead of just a single column of points, we now have 2 columns, T and path. So the path field is going to be used to tell Tableau how to connect the points. So similar to the points field that we used in the previous examples. And the T field is going to be used to draw the curve and will be a value evenly spaced between -6 and 6. So for our example, we're going to be using 25 points. So we'll have a value at every 0.5 increment. So -6, -5.5, -5, and so on until we reach 6. You could also use 50 points for a smoother curve and have the value at every 0.25. Really, you can use however many points you want. You just need to do the math to evenly space them between -6 and 6. And why -6 and 6? I have absolutely no idea, to be honest. I just know that those are the values needed for the sigmoid function to work properly. All right, so to build our curved lines, we only need 2 calculations. First is the sigmoid function, and this is just a mathematical function. It's never going to change. It's always going to be the same, and that's listed right here at the top. And then the second, we're going to use our starting positions and ending positions along with that sigmoid function to calculate our curve values. So essentially what this calculation is doing is, assuming your chart is going from left to right, it's calculating the total vertical distance that needs to be traveled. So the end position minus the start position, and then multiplying that out by the sigmoid function to space the points out appropriately on the y-axis to get that nice S-shaped curve. So we're going to build our curves, and then we'll come back to this calculation. So if you're following along at home, just click on the Sigmoid demo slope chart tab down here, and the Sigmoid data slope chart data source. And we're going to bring out the T field from our data source on the columns. And we're going to bring curve onto rows. Change this to a line. Bring line ID out onto color. And even though we don't need to, we're going to bring path onto path. And there you go. With just 2 simple calculations, we're able to draw all of these really nice curved lines. Let's take a closer look at how those calculations work. So the sigmoid calculation, it's just a mathematical function with values ranging between 0 and 1, depending on the t value. So in this table here, the first row is a sigmoid value, and then the second row is just a table calculation showing the difference between a value and the previous value. So if you look at this, you'll notice at the beginning and the end, the values don't really change very much between one step to the next. But as you approach the center, the values start changing much more rapidly. And then when t equals 0, the value of sigmoid is 0.5, exactly halfway between 0 and 1. So if we look at this in context with our lines and the curve calculation, notice that the vertical position doesn't really change much at the beginning of the line or the end of the line, but as it approaches the center, it changes much more rapidly. And then once you get to the center, it's exactly halfway between your starting point and your ending point. So for example, line 4 is highlighted here. This starts at position 4, ends at position 10. So when t equals 0, it's going to be exactly halfway in between, right at 7. So looking at the calculation here, just plugging all of our values in here, it's going to be 4 plus 10 minus 4, which is that vertical distance, times the sigmoid value of 0.5. So you have 4 plus 6 times 0.5 is 3 equals 7. So when t equals 0, the curve value is going to be 7. So we could do this with another example. So where t equals -3, the sigmoid value is 0.047. Plug that into that same simple calculation. You have 4 plus 6 times 0.047 is 4.28. And you can see here, when t equals -3, that curve value is 4.28, just above 4. All right, so that's how this pretty simple calculation works, but let's look at a couple of other examples real quickly. All right, so in our last example, all of our lines had different starting positions and different ending positions, creating kind of like a curved slope chart. But what would happen if all of our lines had the same starting position? So for this example, I have a parameter called Sigmoid start, and we're going to use that instead of our start position field. So everything else stays the same. I'm just going to change my curve calculation so that instead of using the start position, I'm using this Sigmoid start parameter. And if I bring that out onto rows instead of curve, we now have a curved dendrogram, which is pretty common on Tableau Public. And because we use that parameter, this is dynamic, so you can kind of move that starting point around and make it fit nicely with your design. So you can move it all the way to the bottom and put some text up here. You can move it all the way to the top. If you wanted to go the other way, instead, you could just make this sigmoid end and just replace the end value, and then they would all funnel down to the right side in the same position. All right, now on to our last example, everyone's favorite, sankey diagrams. So this isn't going to be an in-depth tutorial on how to build sankeys. So people much smarter than me, aka the Flurlages, and have written a ton of blog posts and shared a lot of templates if you're interested in actually building one. But this is going to be more about taking what we've learned so far and really just understanding the mechanics of how a sankey diagram works and how it's built. So the main difference between these and the other Sigmoid examples we just looked at is those use lines. Here we're going to use the polygons. So basically what we need to do is draw 2 curved lines instead of 1, and then connect those lines together. So when you're thinking about this, thinking about drawing 2 unique lines using the same process we did in previous examples, and then we're going to connect those lines using the polygon mark type and telling Tableau how to connect them. So this is going to be just a very simple example. Normally you would use a lot of table calculations in Tableau to determine the positions and the widths of each polygon, but we're going to keep it very simple. We're just going to use fields from our data source for the positions, and we're going to make everything the same thickness. Everything is just going to have a thickness of 1. So it's going to be more of kind of like a sankey slope chart, I guess. I don't know what you call it, but. So here's our data. We have 6 rows that we're going to use to create 6 polygons, and we have the starting and ending position for each, just like we did in the last Sigmoid example. But you may notice something a little bit different here about the densification table. So we still have the T field and the path field, but now we have a third field called side. So we have 25 records where the side is min, and then 25 records where the side is max. And this is going to allow us to draw 2 separate lines, our min line, which is going to be our bottom line. If we go back and look at this picture here. So this is going to be our min line, and then the one up here is going to be our max line. And structuring the data this way allows us, it gives us the data points that we need to draw both of those lines together. So if you look at the T field, you'll see that the values run from -6 up through 6 on the min side. And then on the max side, they reverse order and go from 6 down to -6. but the path field is sequential from 0 to 49. And this is really important, and we'll talk more about it in just a couple of minutes. So the inputs are going to be our start and end position for our data source. Those are going to be for the min line. We also need the start and end position for our max line. And for those, we're just going to add 1 to our start and end position. So we have the sigmoid function, then we have the start position max, which is just going to be this plus 1, and our end position max, which is just going to be this plus 1. And now let's look at the curve calculation. So at first glance, this may look a little bit complicated, but it's almost identical to the calculation we used in the previous example. So when we connected to our densification table, we basically created 2 sets of points, one for the min line and one for the max line. So in this calculation, if that side field equals min, then the calculation is exactly the same as the previous example. It's the start position plus that vertical distance traveled times sigmoid. If that field equals max, so it doesn't equals min, else when that field equals max, same exact calculation, except we're using the values for that upper line, that max line, which is the start position max and end position max instead of start position and end position. But the calculation exactly the same, just swapping in these other 2 fields that we calculated. All right, so let's start building our curves. If you're following along at home, just click on the Sigmoid Demo Sankey tab, and then the Sigmoid Data Sankey data source. First, we're going to right click and bring out T. And we'll right click and bring out curve. For now, I'm going to bring side onto detail. Let's change this to a line and bring our line ID onto color. So this is looking pretty good. For each of our sections, we now have 2 lines that are moving together from left to right. So if you look at 6, you can see we have the min line and the max line moving in the same direction, following the same path. So now all we need to do is connect those lines together and create a polygon. So I'm going to change the mark type to polygon, and that should do it. All right, that didn't do it. So what's happening now is because we have side on detail, it's breaking our polygons apart. It's treating each of those sides as an individual polygon. So the way this path is working is it's going this way, down here, and then shooting back to the beginning. That's why we get that weird kind of fan thing. So if we remove side from detail, then we should be good to go, right? Because we are no longer breaking those into different polygons. We'll take that off, and that is not much better. So remember earlier how I said it's always important to address the path field, even if you don't need it for your views. You always want to tell Tableau how to connect the points, because right now it's connecting point 1 from this line to point 1 to that line, to point 2 on this line, to point 2 on that line. And we don't want that. We want to use our path field, which had points from 0 to 49 on the path. And there we go. So just to review again quickly what happened. So we know why we had to remove the side field, but how did the path field fix our viz? So remember in the densification table, we had T values that went from -6 to 6 for this line. And then from 6 to -6 on this line. And then we had our sequential path field that went from 0 to 49. So when we put that path field on path, we told Tableau that we want to connect these in order. So we want to go from 0 to 24, and then it's going to jump up to 25 and then go back down to 49. And because we're using polygons, Tableau automatically connects the first and last point, creating our nice sankey polygon. All right, so those are a couple of things you can build with sigmoid curves, but there are so many others. If you check out part 3 of that blog series, I go over a few more examples, like how to build proportion plots and how to use that dynamic model that I mentioned earlier. So that's all I'm going to cover today. But what can you do with these different techniques? So these were some pretty simple applications, but you can do some really, really cool stuff with them. I'm not saying that my stuff is really cool, but if you do look at my portfolio, nearly every one of my visualizations uses one or more of these techniques. So here we have circles and Bezier curves, sigmoid curves. All three of these use circles and Bezier curves. This uses circles and a different type of curve. Circles, 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 sigmoid. Pretty much everything I've done for the last 2 years leverages these different techniques. So that's all I have for you today. As I mentioned earlier, all of this information and more is available on domorewithdata.com. If you enjoyed the session or have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And I'm also happy to stick around and answer any questions if there are any. And thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. This is awesome. As expected, lots of people really interested in this. I think there's been a lot of conversations, so I think, and Trig at some point, so that we can catch up to what you guys have going on. One quick question. I would say you kind of started to talk about this in terms of use cases. When it comes to, I guess I'm thinking more businesses in cases where you're working with clients and not necessarily just community work, what are some of the places where you found using curves to actually be better than, a typical bar chart, straight line chart, things like that?
Almost none. So as a consultant, I never build anything like this for, this is for me purely for the Tableau public work. Occasionally I will build a sankey diagram if it's the best chart, and sometimes it is if you want to see the flow from one state to another and see drop-off rates and things like that. A sankey can be helpful, but there's usually better ways to visualize some of this data. These things, they don't perform very well. They're very difficult to hand off to other people once you build them. So yeah, I would not recommend building these in the workplace. But if you're more interested in like data art and building out stuff for Tableau Public, then you can have a lot of fun with these techniques.
Awesome. Good to know. Though I do think I agree, Laura. I've been trying to work through org charts. I know at least in the agency world, it's always helpful to know kind of where our clients are, who's on first, who kind of ladders up to who. So that's one place where it has been useful, or even like web flow data, which you kind of mentioned as well. But I think the fun part is obviously some of these projects. And if you haven't been to Brian's Tableau Public, definitely go there. There's lots of really useful things and tools and tricks, but also really cool curved items. As with our first presentation, Brian, there are a couple of more specific questions if you don't mind checking those out to some of the things that you talked about. But want to get to Zack's presentation on visionary velocity. So I'm the only one looking at that slide. 1 second. Here we go. So Zack is a Tableau visionary as well, ambassador, and is also a data specialist with JLL, which, if you don't know, is where the Tableau's greatest visitors seem to all congregate and talk amongst themselves. Zack has created nearly 200 data visualizations, received 7 Viz of the Day picks and 2 Vizzy Awards, and also is the host of an awesome podcast called Data Plus Love, where lots of really interesting people that are doing lots of really interesting things come on and have talked about their Tableau journey. So I think it's a very interesting place to go, and you should check it out. I'm sure he will talk about his podcast, but it's a really cool thing to look at. So with that, Zack will talk visionary velocity, improving your skill, speed, and thinking through public work.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is actually the second time I'm doing this today. So I am on a world tour, and this is the final stop. So you guys are getting the absolute best version of this. And it scales nicely to be an hour or a half hour. So we'll be doing the slightly quicker version. But as I'm Zack Bowders. Hi. So we're talking about getting faster, but all of the Daft Punk stuff quickly. And how do you do that, right? So that's me. I do a lot of stuff. But let's not rehash that. Okay. So you just sat through 2 amazing presentations by 2 guys that you thought, wow, they're so much smarter than me. And you're definitely not going to think that after my presentation about me. And that's okay, because my tips here are for all of you. And that's not to say that everyone else's wasn't, but this is how you can start at your beginning of your journey and how to progress through that and how to move ahead with your skills as well as your sort of manage your relationships online. So PowerPoint presentations are too often resemble a school play, very loud, very slow, and very simple, said Edward Tufte in 2003, which is ironic because now he only presents virtually through PowerPoint. So I hope his PowerPoints are like really awesome now. And you can go through and see his website, which also kind of looks like it did in 2003. But anyway, let's not waste your time with that because I'm not going to waste my time doing Tableau stuff online if I'm not having fun, to which I then also responded, there's a 10 billion% chance that you're going to burn out unless you find a way to invigorate and inspire yourself by doing this. So much like Steve was saying, how oftentimes you have to have a problem before you feel like doing something, you have to have a motivation and reason for doing stuff in the first place. Otherwise, you're not going to keep doing it. So you made the first step. You're already here at a tug today, but what's going to keep you going? Because I've seen many people who were rising stars in the Tableau community, really talented, really hardworking, and then they just sort of burn out and drop off. So some of you are bound to be sticklers and you're saying, what's this about anyway, Zach? I just had 2 really rigorous presentations. I need some concrete, story of where this is going. So, okay, this is where it's going. We're going to talk about public work, collaboration, and finding or creating your niche. So public work. Everyone starts in a different place, and that's okay. By the time you see someone's first public work, they may be brand new to data visualization in Tableau, or they may have been doing it for years. You don't necessarily know. So that's one reason, first of all, you don't want to compare yourself and against other people. You want to compare yourself against yourself and track your own journey. So this is a friend of mine, Jared Flores, in his first public visualization. And it looks very clean, very neat, very orderly, the kind of stuff he was doing at work at the time. And it looks great. You can tell he is already very established in what he is doing and what he knows. This is Judith Becker, who is another Tableau visionary. Her very first work maybe is a little simpler in terms of the chart type, but you can tell that she was going in an artistic direction. She was trying to express herself by some of the vivid colors, poppy art choices, and icons. This is an example of Luke Abraham and his first viz. And as you can see, it's very sophisticated, actually. It's very orderly, it's very thoughtful, and it's highly interactive. If you go interact with this, you'll be blown away, especially to say, wow, that was your first public visualization. But that's not to say it was his first visualization. It's his first public visualization. Everyone doesn't start on public. Most people are already doing Tableau stuff at work, and at some point it leads to them discovering that there is a larger world beyond that. So having said that, this was my first public visualization in July 2017. I actually recently found a picture of my very first Tableau training, which was March 2016 in New York City. I actually still know my Tableau trainer, Tiffany Spalding. She's great. But this came out of me wanting more out of what I was doing with data visualization at work. So it looks a lot like the kind of stuff that we were doing at work. We hadn't really interacted with the Tableau community yet. We didn't really have an idea of best practices. And we knew some stuff that our sort of audiences liked. They liked these call out boxes where we had factoids that sort of populated as they went. We were doing lots of bar versus Gantt comparisons. And I basically took a lot of the techniques we were doing at work and sort of whimsified it a bit. I didn't even know there's a place to put it. I didn't know Tableau Public was a thing. I just knew I wanted more. I was curious. I wanted to explore. And I wasn't always getting those opportunities at work to do that. So this was my 200th visualization. So sorry for my bio. I've already exceeded that. I think I'm at like 205 or 207 now. This is a sankey, and it describes the plot of the John Wick franchise. So you start on the left with each of the films, then to each location of the films, to each of the weapons used in the films, and then who the weapons were used on. So this is a sankey template set up by the Flerlich twins, but understanding how to format my data, how to think about the data, and how to tell the data story is stuff that I would not have been able to create this viz earlier on, even if I had understood the template, because it took me doing the reps and putting in the work to understand where I was headed and what it takes to do a lot of this. So some of you might be as old as me, but Legend of Zelda first came out in the late 80s. And while it's become a cultural icon since then, it began with a little tiny pixelated sprite guy named Link, starting off on a pretty open map with nothing. And in the upper left corner of the screen, there's a little black square. And if you take Link up in there, there's this old man in the cave. And for the sake of argument, the old man is Tableau. And the old man says, it's dangerous to go alone. Take this. So many people would think that the sword is Tableau as a software, but it's not. The sword is the community and Tableau is the old man, because you can get pretty good technically at using Tableau on your own. You know, you can probably look some stuff up online, maybe watch some YouTube videos and take some classes, but it's really through the interaction with others and developing yourself within a community that you're going to start to see a lot of those reps pay off. So here's some examples of some different ways you can get out there and interact with the Tableau community now. I saw some people asking about Workout Wednesday. There's also Back to Viz Basics, which is kind of a new version of Makeover Monday, which was one of the bigger sort of gateway exercises. But all of these are online public exercises that people participate in regularly. It's the Data Fam is a hashtag the Tableau community uses to communicate with each other, usually on Twitter. But a lot of these other things are different, you know, aspects of the Tableau community that you can dig into, like Project Health Viz is health centered. There's Games Night Viz, which is based on gaming. And Back to Viz Basics is an opportunity to try to get good at the most basic versions of charts, because sometimes we try to go overboard on simple things. So this is a graphic, because this is PowerPoint, and you're going to get graphics sometimes. But the real point of the slide is it's literally true that you can succeed best and quickest by helping others to succeed. So look at Brian's presentation right before this. So Brian obviously really understands radials, and I really don't understand radials. But Brian obviously got even better at understanding radials by having to explain how radials work, both in terms of his blog and as well as presenting it to you just now. The fact that sometimes working with others, helping others along, you develop your own skills. And not only do you get better at doing those things yourself, you get better at explaining and understanding why you're doing those things to begin with. So if you think about the Top Gun franchise, and I'm not going to spoil anything from the new Top Gun Maverick movie, which you should have seen in theaters by now, but we'll let that slide. So Top Gun is in these movies, Pete Maverick Mitchell is an awesome pilot, but he didn't start off an awesome pilot. I mean, by the time we get to him, he is an awesome pilot. But obviously, at some point before that, someone taught him how to fly. Someone not only taught him how to fly, but they taught him the different techniques that it would take and when to apply them in terms of flying, right? Like when he's in a fight with Miggs at the end of the first movie, they didn't just say, hey, fly an airplane. They taught him how to use, you know, both his offensive and defensive capabilities. So by the end of the first movie, we see that he's now become good at collaborating with others. He can fly with a wingman, which is something he wasn't good at in the beginning. He was only really good at working by himself. And by the time we get to Top Gun Maverick, which is the latest movie, we see that while he may not be an admiral, that's not his aptitude. He is still a pilot. He has learned to bring other pilots along with him, inspire them, and teach them how to be better pilots, all the while flying alongside them. So for me, collaboration has been a big part of my journey. So I'm going to share with you 3 different collaborations I've done. I've also collaborated with Brian in the past. And each of these, I learned different things from them, both about my skills and myself, and they moved me along in my journey. So with Kate, I met her at Tableau Conference 2019 in person, but we had been friends on Twitter for a while before that. And we were looking for a project we could work on together. And we both landed on Girl Scout cookies because it was the early spring. And everywhere you go, there's, you know, essentially a free child labor out there selling cookies in front of the grocery store or your friends at work. And we're like, how much money is there behind this? And where is it actually going? Because while I have 2 daughters, neither of them is a scout, but all of my friends are constantly talking about all the money they're shelling out, despite the fact that all these Girl Scout cookies are being sold. So if you go on the Girl Scouts website, you can get to the bottom of a lot of their stats. So this dashboard is based entirely on data supplied by the Girl Scouts. And there's this timeline that goes down the page. And actually, if you hover on any of the dates, we give you a lot of different facts about the history of the Girl Scouts. But the Girl Scouts bring in almost $800 billion in gross revenue annually from Girl Scout cookies. And you can see that Thin Mints are the #1 cookie. And as you make it down to the middle of the page, you can get a better idea of where this money actually goes. So more than half of it is actually going to like administrative overhead, like executives within the Girl Scouts are the ones that are getting the most of the benefit. 27% of the money is paying the bakery. So that's your expense. And then only 15% hits the troop itself, with less than 5% going back to the girls in terms of like rewards and prizes. So at the bottom of the page, we break down some of the actual expenses that the girls themselves are having to pay just to participate in the Girl Scouts. And then we provided some click-through link options in the terms of little cookies on the bottom of the page about how you can either donate to the Girl Scouts themselves or, to support the organization as a whole. With Adam, who we now jokingly call the Data Fam Mayor, he was early in his blogging journey and he was looking for something different. So he asked me if I could sort of do a Hunter S. Thompson style gonzo journalism blog post for him, which was way outside my field, but he liked the kind of quirky visualizations I had been doing on Tableau Public. So working together with him, I actually had to expand my creative thought process to better understand how to talk about data visualization outside of work. When you're talking with clients, it's very easy to talk nuts and bolts about what you're doing. But when you have to get into the creative process and why you made some of the choices you did and what your thoughts were behind that, not only are you having to expand your vocabulary, but you're having to expand your thought process. So it was an opportunity for me to start thinking more in terms of the why am I doing stuff as opposed to just doing it because I thought it was interesting. And with Sarah operates Iron Quest, which is really a sort of monthly exercise that helps prepare people for Iron Viz, which is the big annual contest at Tableau Conference. And for a lot of us, we don't have a lot of practice in terms of some of the creative exercises that go into creating a really amazing Iron Viz entry. So Sarah asked me if I could help her both in terms of hosting and judging a mobile first month. I've never made a mobile data viz before. In fact, in Tableau Public, I usually turn off mobile viz immediately, which I think most of you do as well. So not only did I have to make one to start to understand how the process works, I then had to practice giving feedback in a public forum, which is way different than giving feedback one-on-one. Because when I'm just talking to you, you understand where I'm coming from as a person and we can sort of talk back and forth. But when I'm sort of talking out there in a video, I have to be a lot more sensitive to the fact that not only am I airing someone's work in a public forum, I don't want to shame or embarrass them or set them back in any way, but I also want to make sure that we can sort of discuss some of the things like maybe try this instead, or I don't quite understand the thought process behind this, but I bet I would if we talked about it. Just different ways of sort of understanding the sharing process and feedback. So along these journeys, I started to think about what do I care about? Like, what's the stuff that gets me going? So for me, I'm really inspired by things like design and pop culture and podcasting. So then I looked at some of my early work that I've been doing on Tableau Public, and it was stuff I didn't care about and I wasn't super proud of. So all of these were for Makeover Monday, which we don't do anymore, but it was a weekly exercise where there'd be a data set and everyone would go out and make something fun. Ideally, you're supposed to take about an hour, but you could tell sometimes people put in more. But these were all data sets where you can look at it and tell I wasn't really into what I was dealing with. I was trying to find ways to amuse myself on a topic that I didn't actually care about. And as a result, the stuff doesn't really look that great or inspired. I mean, sometimes I was trying to get kitschy by making stuff look like a box for Christmas spending, or I was using unnecessary clip art, or I was trying to just be funny with my titles. So why was I not doing the things that I cared about? If this is something I'm interested in, I'm passionate about data viz, and I want to get better at it, and I want to engage with the community, why aren't I doing this stuff? So I started doing that. So first, I started tackling subjects that I was more interested in. So I tackled stuff like Chili's and the plot of movies and like movie ratings. I'm a big nerd. So over here on the left, I used some curves and I said, what if I made a chart that shows you the heat of Chili's and made it look like the red eye of a stove to first catch your eye and then inform you? In the upper right corner, I tried to map the plot of something that's unmappable. How do you map a movie? How do you map dreams? So I said, if I were to try to describe the movie Inception to people, and I had to do that on a chart, how would I do that? So not only did I have to better understand how, story worked, I had to come up with a way to display something that you can't really show on a bar chart or a pie chart. So I actually had to map Cartesian lines there to show that. And then in the bottom corner, I used small multiples to describe the first 3 movies of popular horror franchises to more quickly show how fast some of them fall off. So in the upper left corner, you see Evil Dead was pretty consistent. And then by the time you get to the far right corner, you can see Leprechaun went down the toilet almost immediately. And I used candy corn colors because it's fun. And if you're not having fun, you're not going to keep doing it. I also started talking more. So one of the big things for me about Tableau conferences, I love the sort of casual conversations I had with colleagues about data and their projects. And by getting to know them, I understood their projects better. So I started a podcast at the beginning of 2020, Data Plus Love. And every 2 weeks, I drop a new episode, usually with a guest where we talk about their work and just casually get to know them better and understand where they're coming from. And sometimes without, where I talk about particular data projects or ideas or what's going on in the community. But this is another example of, as a result of me talking about this more often, I've had to expand my own understanding, because you need to have the language in order to sort of properly talk about data viz. And sometimes when you don't have the words, you have to fumble your way there to get there. So I saw a presentation at Tableau conference a few years ago by Mike Cisneros, and in it, he quotes a Broadway show called Title of Show. And the lyrics to this contain a line that says, "I'd rather be 9 people's favorite thing than 100 people's 9th favorite thing." So in terms of the work that you're putting out there, are you doing work that you think other people are going to like because you hope that they'll like it? Are you doing stuff that you really like? Because I guarantee you, if you do the stuff that you really like and that you try projects that you're really passionate about, you may not get as big a response as if you only talked about what is super popular at the time. But you will be personally more invested, and the people that are into the stuff you make are going to be more into it. So you're going to get a higher level of engagement, and that's great because you're building your own little community. So this is my progression in terms of how stuff was going. So like I said, 2016 was my first Tableau training. 2017, I dropped the M. Night Shyamalan viz. And by 2021, I became a Tableau Zen master, now known as a Tableau visionary. Now, not everyone's journey is going to be the same. And a lot of people have been doing stuff a lot longer, and they don't see, the sort of the accolades for it. And I never expected to either. My big thing is I always hope to be a Tableau ambassador because I've always sort of been so invested in the community. But for me, the big thing really is I get to make the stuff I want. And more than ever, I make more of the stuff I want. So the big pressure of becoming a Tableau visionary is, am I suddenly going to have to become someone else? Am I not going to be expected to go out there and have fun and make stuff that's a little quirky and weird? And the answer is no, because that's why they picked me. That's why they wanted me. Like the fact that I was so invested, that I was so interested in helping and inspiring others, and the fact that I had sort of my own thing that I was doing. So what's your thing? Like what's stopping you from going out there and creating your own lane? So back to that bulleted summary for the sticklers, we talked about public work and the need for collaboration and finding or creating your niche. It may be out there, it may not be, but either way, there's no gatekeepers. So if there's something you really want to do, just do it. Like there's no permission. There's no waiting for someone to tell you to. All that's up to is just for you to start doing it. So this presentation has been Visionary Velocity. You are the last stop on the grand tour of this, but I will be returning hopefully with less. You're doing too much and you should stop. So I'm Zack Bowders. If you want to find me, here's some of my links. The easiest way is to find me at Zack Bowders on Twitter. I've got a link there with all my other links. And I'm happy to talk to you about your projects or anything if you want to reach out.
Awesome. Good job, Zack. Thank you. Lots of people sharing. Well, in addition to the applause, I appreciate also those sharing other resources and things that people can look out for that you mentioned. And I think in line with that, one question I had is, are there ways that you, I guess, now looking back, you had 200 visits ago, are there things that you tried to make in a specific order? Are there moments where you created visits just to be able to do new things? Or are you always focused on, I just want to see this data, I want to explore this topic? I guess, how do you go about creating visits over time that help you, to your point, get better at curves or get better at certain things?
A lot of it comes down to, I started keeping a composition book and I would doodle in it and come up with new ideas. So sometimes when I had an idea, I'd write stuff down in there like Pitch Perfect 2, they won a $42,000 Dave & Buster's gift card. How much does that actually get you at Dave & Buster's? And like, I might come back to that later, I might not. But yeah, a lot of times, like the Inception visualization, I was actually sitting down, I started sketching it. Like, I think I understand how this works. And much to my delight, someone at one point later found a sketch by Christopher Nolan, and it's kind of close. So I felt really
Nice.
gratified by that. But for me, you can look at my portfolio and see there's a certain point where I sort of switched lanes. Like up until a certain point, I was mostly doing data sets from community exercises. So what I was doing was definitely one thing. And at the point I decided to start doing topics I was more interested in, a lot of times there wasn't even data for those. And I would either have to manually cultivate the data. So my John Wick viz I showed you in the beginning with the sankey, I actually had to watch all 3 John Wick movies and write down a timestamp and who and how every time he killed somebody, which I mean, it's like at first that sounds like a lot of fun, but it almost ruined John Wick movies for me. I'm not going to say it did, but it came close. But yeah, a lot of times I was having to cultivate my own data sets, which also meant I was developing a new skill, which was how to cultivate data. And then how to think about how the data needs to be shaped for my project. So like Brian was showing with some of the data densification he was doing, sometimes you might have to do that. Sometimes you might have to do data scaffolding. You might have to do things you've never even heard of before. And you might not even have the words for them. I was using data scaffolding on a project once where I was trying to create animations on a page, and I didn't even know that's what it was. So like in so many of these things, you may come up with an idea, and sometimes you might be the first person at the party, and other times you're not, and you just don't know it yet. But like sort of by coming up with these new ideas and asking, is that possible? You're gonna come up with new techniques that help you at work. And I think for me, a lot of it was my early work. I really was trying to be other people. I would see stuff they were doing, like, that looks cool, I'd like to do that. But none of it like sort of made me happy, and none of it really sort of moved me along. It's when I started just thinking for myself, I'm like, how would Zack do this? And a lot of times, if you look at my portfolio, most of my visits for the past year and a half are almost single chart visits exclusively. But that's because I want to sometimes show that it's possible to make something that's fairly simple to make, but it's also super effective and can still look cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then one other here, just because I think it might help a lot of people, is how do you make time for visiting outside of work? This person has a tough time fitting it in. Obviously, you have a full-time job. Is this your main hobby? I guess, what are the ways that you found to carve this time out, especially at this point?
At this point, most of the visits I tackle are 1 to 3 hour projects. So being intentional about how much time I'm willing to put into something. So if you sort of come to stuff with that limitation, it will definitely change what you decide to take on. So by applying limitations to yourself on purpose, that can actually be very freeing. Another thing is, if you work at JLL, which you could, we do allow time for personal projects. In fact, right after this meeting, we're doing a Tableau adventure today, which is where we have an hour blocked off. At the beginning of the meeting, someone shares some tips, and then everyone goes and works on projects. So we both have internal projects you could choose to participate in, or you could take some time and, have some fun with this stuff. Also, for me, a lot of times in the evening, I might have like 45 minutes from between the time my kids go to bed and my wife's taking a shower, and I'll sort of mess around with new ideas during that time. So yeah, there's the for most people, there's the time there. A lot of these visits were done when my children were very young, and I was not an absentee dad. Like I was there putting them to bed. But if there's some time afterwards and my wife and I are watching TV or something, I might pull out my laptop and mess around a little bit and come up with some new ideas.
Yeah, I love that. And I would echo that. I think even just kind of cutting it up in chunks, like maybe you don't have 3 hours, but you might have 15 minutes to sketch out an idea, start collecting something, create one graph that maybe isn't even all that great, but it's on paper, come back for another 20 minutes, make it great. I think that's how at least I find time, is that I might have a 2 hour viz, but it may take me 2 weeks to make it because I'm spending it 10, 15 minutes at a time. I also have a young son, so time is precious. So I get it where I can. But awesome, Zack. Thank you. We will definitely post links to the podcast, to the vizzes. We've got a few questions about that as well, so we'll make sure to put that on as well. But thank you all. We're starting to head toward the end here. One thing we did want to bring up, and yet again, I did not share before I went to the slide. One thing I wanted to bring up is that, we are having nominations for ambassadors. As I mentioned, Brian and Zack are already ambassadors, but this is a program where we can nominate anyone. If you would like to nominate yourself, that's totally an option. So look out for that. It's on, if you go to Tableau's Twitter profile or LinkedIn profile, they've got links here. We've also got a QR code, so feel free to scan that. And the nominations are due by the, I think they're still going. At least I have heard of people still nominating people. So you've got until July. They've opened just a week ago, and they'll announce them in the fall. So be on the lookout for those things. Feel free to apply. Also, if you have someone that you would love to see speak, if you also want to be a speaker, these are a way to do that. You can fill out this form. It doesn't have to be just for you. It could be for someone you'd like to see us speak. So we'll put that link in the email, but you can also use that QR code as well. And lastly, as Annabelle mentioned, we've got one more monthly before we do our summer holiday. So at the end of July, we'll have another great panel of people, including someone from Tableau. So be on the lookout for an email where you can register for that event. As well, we have the QR code, and it's always on our user group page. So you can always find us at usergroups.tableau.com/analytics. But we will put out more information via email. And with that, thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you all at our July Tug.
Thank you.